we've been working on this project for 2 years now. It's efficacy of drop nets and corral traps for wild pig capture for control, damage, and disease management. It's been a collaborative effort between Texas A&M University, where I'm working on my master's, the Noble Foundation, and the National Wildlife Research Center. Everybody is familiar with and has heard stories and knows about the damages hogs cause in the United States since their introduction. Those damages range from crop damage to landscapes in your residential areas to golf courses. That, along with the wild pigs' reproductive potential and their potential for disease transmission, all have trained us to come up with better, more efficient techniques to control those pigs. We don't control pigs because there's just a lot of them. We control pigs to mitigate damage and to rid ourselves of those disease potential transmissions. A lot of control techniques in the past, there's been a very broad range of them. They range from non-lethal techniques such as fencing hogs out, harassment, contraception, and then legal methods such as snares, toxicants, shooting and hunting and trapping. I will point out that contraceptives and toxicants are not registered in the United States, so we can't use those, but there's some work being done in Australia looking at those different control techniques. Trap designs, a lot of studies out there have demonstrated that trapping is the most effective way to control feral hogs compared to shooting and snares and those sort of things. The different trap designs range from box-type traps, very small box-type traps, which are often ineffective because they capture 2 or 3 pigs in a trapping event, if not just one. Corral traps are a little larger. Those are more permanently fixed to the ground. They're not, the box traps can be loaded on a trailer, moved to a new position, and rebaited. Corral traps are more permanent, but they are oftentimes larger and can capture larger numbers of pigs if proper baiting techniques, proper trapping techniques are implemented. In this study, as the title mentioned, is going to be focused on looking at drop nets as a potential, another potential tool for the control of feral pigs. Drop nets were first used on prairie chickens and wild turkeys. They were very effective at capturing large numbers of animals. They were further utilized in capturing white-tailed deer. The Noble Foundation's been using drop nets to capture white-tailed deer since 1983. If you guys didn't know that. And actually, this is kind of the precursor to this project. While out trapping white-tailed deer, we started noticing problems with feral hogs consuming the bait. We weren't able to capture white-tailed deer. So we quickly realized, well, hey, there might be some potential here for the drop net to be an effective control technique, because oftentimes we're able to see these entire sounders on the bait at one time in the center of the net. So with some casual trapping of feral pigs under drop nets, we noticed it may be a viable alternative, so we wanted to implement this study. And the 3 objectives of this study were to compare the effectiveness and efficiency or efficacy of corral traps and drop nets for capturing wild pigs in southern Oklahoma. Our secondary objective was to determine if wild pigs removal practices reduce damage on native and improved rangelands. And we also wanted to look at exposure rates to 3 viral or bacterial diseases that are of particular importance to domestic pig farms and other livestock operations. Our study area, we took 3 ranches in Love County, Oklahoma, the Noble Foundation's Coffee Ranch and Oswalt Ranch, and also Bill Hoffman's ranch. Each of those ranches were split into 2 experimental units and randomly assigned a treatment, whether that be corral traps, drop nets, or control, where absolutely no trapping went on at all. We trapped between January and April in 2010 and 2011. And on each of those ranches, multiple trap sites were monitored with infrared triggered cameras. For instance, here's our 3 study areas in Love County. This is Bill Hoffman's ranch, this is our Oswalt Road Ranch, and this is the Coffee Ranch. Each of those ranches was, like, as I mentioned, was split into 2 units. For instance, this property received corral traps on the east half of the property, and it was a control where no trapping at all occurred on the west half of the property. Our methods, our trap construction was done in corral traps were constructed with T-posts and cattle panels. We had 2 compartments on our corral trap. I'll show you guys a picture of that in just a minute. The compartments shared a rear panel, and there was 2 different door styles or gate styles on those corral traps. So on one end there was a saloon style gate, on the other end there was a spring gate, or a single spring gate, so 1 door. The drop net system, as described by G et al. 1999, was used for the drop net applications. It was basically a 60 by 60 foot net with 10 centimeter mesh or 4 inch mesh, and had anchored supports and rope harnesses. And I want to point out that as the corral trap is activated by the animal, with the use of a tripwire, the drop nets are actually activated by us. They're a man-activated trigger. And here's a picture of our corral traps. I mentioned a double compartment corral trap. This is actually a divider wall between that T-post and that T-post. The divider wall is part of both of the traps. As I mentioned earlier, this is a single spring door. It's 1 hinge door. And this is our saloon style door with 2 springs. Both of those are wired open. The first 3 days they're wired open to facilitate hog entry into the traps, and then we later set them with a trip wire and a prop stick, basically, that props the door open. The animals hit the trip wire and are captured. Here's a picture of our drop net. Basically, here's a bird's eye view of that. Corral traps were pre-baited for 7 days with whole kernel corn. That's kind of the gold standard we used throughout the entire project. Traps were only set up if use was documented in those 7-day pre-baiting period. Pigs were allowed to become familiar with the traps. For instance, I pointed out earlier, gates were wired open for 3 days after they were constructed. Bait was streamed through the gates to try to entice the pigs into the trap. Once that bait was cleaned up in that stream, bait was only supplemented in the back of the trap up to 16 kilograms. Traps were activated after a documented pig inside of the trap or under the net. We monitored those with infrared triggered cameras between 5 days pre-trap construction through the entire trapping period, and we continued trapping sites until there was no more documented use for at least 5 days. Our drop nets were also pre-baited much in the same way. The only difference was that drop nets were activated immediately. This was a advantage to the drop net system. We noticed that pigs would use the drop nets the night in which they were set up, so they were allowed to be trapped the night in which they were set up. They were also monitored with infrared triggered cameras throughout the trapping period. Some of our analysis on trap effectiveness, what we did was we took the identifiable segment of the pig population and used them as our sample. So basically they were used in marker capture calculations to obtain an estimate. For instance, these are identifiable pigs. They're pigs that we can recognize each and every time they show up at the trap sites. So basically our assumption was that if we can capture, say, 70% of the identifiable pig population, we can also capture 70% of the black or red or non-identifiable pig population. So we use that identifiable segment as our sample. Trap efficiency, we calculated catch per unit effort by trap type. So every bit of activity spent on the ranch. So when I entered the gate, I started recording the activity, whether it was baiting, setting up traps, loading pigs, et cetera, et cetera. All that time was recorded on data sheets, and we separated that out by trap type to calculate a catch per unit effort. Observational data, we looked at cameras on all of our trap sites, whether it was nets or corral traps. We set those cameras to record video and still shots. to document some of the pig responses to trapping events or pig responses to just traps being set up. Give you an explanation of a typical trap night with a drop net. Since corral traps are animal activated, we didn't have to do anything other than put bait in the trap, and after we had hogs patterned to the trap, we didn't have to do anything but put bait in the trap and set up a trigger. The drop nets were a little different. We had to actually be there. So a typical trap night with a drop net, pigs were patterned. So we'd try to get 3 consecutive days of pig use at approximately the same time. We'd arrive an hour early the day we wanted to trap. We'd listen for a radio signal. We had infrared triggered trail monitors connected to a two-way radio system that alarmed us of animals activating motion underneath the net. So we listened for those radio signals. We observed pigs from a distance, typically 200 yards. Waited for the entire sounder to enter the net and remote drop the net, and then we ran to dispatch hogs. And here's an example of one of those instances. We wait on all these pigs to get around the center pole. We drop it, and then they go crazy. Some of the results, how effective were we? Well, in a 2-year study, we caught 356 hogs. The maximum captured in a corral trap was 15. That's mind you, in both sides of the corral trap. We had 11 in one side and 4 in the other, I believe. But so this corral trap, the maximum we caught in that was 15. The maximum we caught in a drop net was 27 in one drop. Our mean capture events, and this includes events where we caught a single hog in drop nets as well. We stuck around at each of these individual trap sites to capture every hog in the study. So after we caught 4 or 5, we dropped the net 4 or 5 times in a location, often we have one boar, single boar come in, such as that. So these mean captures, we caught an average of 4 captures per corral trap and an average of 11 captures in one trapping event in a net. So. Some of the demographics, we actually caught greater than 50%, or greater than 50% of our captures were actually juveniles throughout the study. And our criteria for that, we used from some previous studies, we were able to determine that about a 60-pound hog is sexually reproductive. So we used the 60 pounds to anything under 60 pounds was a juvenile, and anything 60 and above was an adult. So greater than 50% of our total pigs captured in the study were juveniles. We also documented sex ratio differences between trap types. So with our corral traps, 26% of the adults were male. With drop nets, 42% of the adults were male. So we're looking at a larger ratio of male to female with the drop nets. This slide is our capture rate of identifiable hog population by site. So basically what this means is 67%, or we caught an average of 67% of the identifiable pig population at each net. We caught an average of 28% of the identifiable pig population at each corral. We also, in the study, we observed a lot of pigs using multiple trap sites. So one pig would be using 2 nets, one pig may be using 2 corral traps. So this next chart, or this next graph, will show you how that was worked out. We if a hog was captured at one of the net sites when it was using 2, it was eliminated from analysis in the other site because it was unable to be captured there, unless it was trapped after that after one of the trap sites. If the trapping period did not overlap, then it was analyzed in both trap sites. So basically what this slide means is we captured 86% of the identifiable pig population using nets, and we caught 53% of the identifiable pig population using corral traps. I'll give you some of the reasons we think that is. We caught larger groups or entire sounders in a single drop with drop nets. Those pigs didn't seem to associate the overhead canopy with danger, not near to the extent as those on the ground corral traps where they encountered a corral trap, were able to see the panels. They didn't seem to associate the overhead canopy with any danger. They didn't appear wary of the nets. Here's maybe one explanation of why. This is one of our trapping events with a corral trap. See how the hog hesitates a little bit to go in. It gets in the trap, it turns around and faces the door. They're oftentimes looking up. And just imagine if there were hogs on the outside of this trap when it goes off, how they may react, and why that sort of behavior could foster trap wary hogs in the future. Just look at the integrity of the trap as it bounces back and forth, and takes a lot of wire. In this slide, I want to point out the date in the bottom left. I'm going to demonstrate to you here why we think the drop nets do not foster that trap wary behavior near to the extent that the corral traps do. Many of you know when landowners or managers are setting up corral traps, the standard is to pre-bait in the trap, get hogs entering the trap, get the entire sounder entering the trap before you set it, otherwise you're not going to be effective. Well, with our drop nets, this is also why we were able to trap those the night in which they were set up. This is January 20th at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. The 3 or 4 days prior to this, they had been doing the same thing, coming about the same time and cleaning up the bait. The next day, the 21st at 1:30, I'm a little late. I probably should have been there a few minutes or a few hours earlier to set that up. But we're there at 1:30 setting the trap up, and at 3 o'clock the same day, all the pigs are underneath it. Hey, look, they're even laying down. This is to me the pigs laying down underneath the net, pigs hanging around, not even consuming bait really. Makes me believe that hogs are comfortable underneath the nets. This is not a one-time incident. This happened nearly every time. There are a few instances that hogs were shy of the nets, but most of the time this is typical. Another advantage to the drop nets were they were selective. As the corral traps are animal-activated triggers, the corral traps are man-activated triggers. So capture of non-target species is basically subject to error on the person manning the trap. If you're going to in a drop net anyway. So we caught raccoons, we caught deer, and let me point out even though these doors are closed and the deer and the raccoon can all possibly get out of that trap because there's not a top on it, once these doors are closed, that severely limits your possibility of capturing a hog. We didn't document a single time in this 2-year study where hogs entered a closed corral trap. And here's another slide of some pigs. But we built these. We put these panels or these plates on the bottom of the door to facilitate manual entry into the traps. In fact, a lot of trap marketers claim that their trap gate or door will capture hogs even after they're already closed, so the door's never truly shut. Well, we didn't document a single case of that happening. Capture efficiency. This was basically the amount of hogs we caught per hour based on all of that activity that we did, all the baiting, all the trapping with nets, trap observation, which was done with the drop nets but not with the corral traps. That was when we had to physically be out in the field sitting watching a net. That accounts for every time we spent on those ranches. And you can see there's not a big difference here, but we were able to catch 1 hog for every 1.9 hours with the drop net and 1 hog for every 2.3 hours with the corral trap. Even though there's not that big a difference, we were still able to capture a much larger percentage of the pigs with drop nets than corral traps. Here's our time allocation slide. Basically, this shows the amount of time we spent. So with the corral traps, most of the time spent, probably 60% of the time spent was baiting with corral traps. With drop nets, 50% of the time was spent on that trap observation. So that's us sitting out in the field waiting on pigs. But that being said, we were still more effective and just as effective, if not a little better, efficiency-wise. Now we go into talking about damage a little bit. Some of the previous work with damage showed that $800 million are lost in the U.S. annually in pig damage. Another estimate, or from the same author actually, $200 in agricultural crop damage each year per hog. They can predate on, or they can promote the spread of invasive species, compete with native wildlife, negatively impact the nutritive capability of soils, and contaminate water sources. Some of those populations are intruding on endangered species and fragile ecosystems. Here's a picture of some hog damage. This is probably in a residential or probably a golf course actually. Here's another photo of some damage on cropland. These are some of the things they can do, and these drastically affect economics. So another source of damage is those wetlands, and these are those type of habitats that may take longer to heal. Our methods for damage assessment, we did a damage assessment on all 3 of these properties. We had a permanent 100-meter transect sampled biannually on Coffee Ranch, Hoffman Ranch, and Oswalt Ranch. Damage within 10 meters of a line transect were sampled on 5 points along that transect, and we estimated damage to the nearest 1 quadrat, which was 0.18 meters squared. We used generalized linear models with repeated measures or random effects in SAS to plot change in damage over time. Pig removal occurred on all 3 ranches between transect sampling periods. And here's that damage plotted. Basically, these first 2 years were the first year was a pre-sampling. Period 2, 3, and 4 were sampled during trapping efforts, and period 5 was a post-sampling. We were able to reduce damage cumulatively over the entire study of 90%. 82% reduction after the initial trapping year on Coffee Ranch, 79% reduction in damage for the first trapping year on Oswalt Ranch, and 43% effectiveness, or 43% damage reduction on Hoffman Ranch for the first trapping year. This is a little different view. This is basically the probability of encountering damage on those transects over time. And as you can see, they're all negatively. Like I said, we reduced damage by 90% in the study area over the course of the study. Drop net treatments experienced large reductions in damage after trapping efforts were implemented. Corral trap treatments also experienced reduction in damage, which suggests that conventional trapping techniques will also reduce damage. And even our no trapping treatments, where no trapping at all occurred, as I showed you in the slide earlier of the ranch, we implemented those control treatments right next to a trapping treatment, which in hindsight we may should have had a ranch-wide control, but that's not how we did it in this study. But we were still able to reduce damage on those control sites, suggesting that control efforts will have a wider range of impact than just the ranch level. To talk about disease a little bit, everybody knows the problems with disease as they can transmit to livestock, to food animals. Previous work on disease, Saliki et al. In 1996, they collected 120 wild pigs in 13 Oklahoma counties. This is near and dear to here. There's several counties right around Love County that were sampled in that study. They detected 44% antibody prevalence for leptospirosis, 17% for porcine parvovirus, 11% for swine influenza, and 2% for PRRS, which is porcine reproductive and respiratory syndrome. No antibodies to brucellosis, pseudorabies, and a few others were detected in any previous Oklahoma studies. In light of lots of brucellosis and pseudorabies being reported in Texas in recent studies, we wanted to further analyze that and look and see if we could detect any of those antibodies in the pig population. So our methods were we collected whole blood from the heart from all of the swine caught in our study. The serum was collected and sent to a lab, and we tested those animals for pseudorabies, brucellosis, and porcine reproductive respiratory syndrome. The only antibody prevalence that was really significant was pseudorabies. And actually pseudorabies was very different from one ranch to the antibody prevalence was very different from one ranch to the next. For instance, on our Oswalt property, the gray bars are the males and the white bars are females tested. On our Oswalt property, we caught basically 55% of the pig, or 55% of the pigs that we captured had antibodies for pseudorabies. Whereas on Coffee Ranch, only separated by 4 or 5 miles, we only detected about 8% prevalence rate for pseudorabies, and on Hoffman we had none. A total prevalence rate of pseudorabies in our study area was 25%. Brucellosis, we actually detected 2 individuals on Oswalt Ranch with brucellosis, and those were actually Brucella abortus, which is the cattle form. The hogs can carry Brucella abortus and Brucella suis, which is a cattle form and a pig form. Those that we detected at Oswalt Ranch had the cattle form. We only detected 1 individual with porcine reproductive respiratory syndrome. That was on Coffee Ranch. Again, I want to emphasize that the fact that earlier I mentioned that drop nets were a little more effective at capturing male pigs. There's some studies out there that show that boars have larger ranges. It's pretty common. Where if we just capture 25% of the boars with corral traps, and boars have those larger ranges, boars are going to more readily spread those diseases because they're traveling long distances. If we trap with corral traps and capture sows and piglets, which is normal throughout a lot of studies, you catch the sows and piglets first. If we do that, those pigs are going to even have larger ranges because they're going to move to areas to find piglets and other sows and more readily spread diseases. So that may be another advantage to the drop net system in population control and control of diseases